Hello everyone, it's Josh again and welcome back to this mini-series on your BA and MA thesis in Applied Linguistics and Multilingualism, where we think together about the process. Let's pick up exactly where we left off. If the literature is the landscape and you've now mapped out the terrain, the next question is, where exactly are we standing? And perhaps more importantly, what are you asking? This is a moment where many students absolutely freeze and lose their cool. They overthink because of this assumption that the research question needs to be groundbreaking, original, impressive, something that changes the field forever. But let me reassure you immediately, that is not the goal of a BA or MA thesis. Holding those expectations for yourself will only create a sense of frustration and put unnecessary pressure on you. Now, the goal is precision. You want to show precision in how you think, how you operationalize a research project, how you approach it. A good research question is therefore not big and scopy, it's clear, it's focused, and most importantly, it's answerable within the time and resources you actually have. A research question should come from the tensions you identified in the literature. It's not invented from nowhere. If the literature review felt like mapping these conversations and noticing patterns, the research question tells me how you're deciding to enter that conversation with purpose and precision. So your research question must translate the big question, given what we know, what do we still need to understand more clearly? So what makes a good research question? First, it must be specific. Rarely will a student pose a research question that's too specific from the beginning. There's always a tendency to go broad. For example, how does translanguaging work in classrooms is just way too broad. It's not a research question, it's actually a field of study. But how do Spanish heritage language learners use translanguaging practices during peer collaboration tasks in a university classroom? Now that's getting somewhere. Notice the narrowing: population, context, activity. Specificity creates feasibility. Students often need support from their supervisors at this stage, so don't be afraid to ask. Second, it must be researchable. It sounds obvious. In my experience, it's absolutely not. You must ask yourself, what kind of data would allow me to answer this? Is it interviews, classroom observations? Is it surveys, document analysis, specific behavioral or activity measures? If you cannot imagine the data that would address your question, then the question you're working with might not be ready yet, and you might need some help. A strong research question always implies a methodological path. It contains within it the seedlings of your design, and you should also bring up this topic with your supervisor. Third, it must be manageable. This is where many BA and MA students overreach. You don't need to examine entire national systems. You do not need to solve structural inequality in one thesis. In fact, please don't try. This is not the right place, and you'll be wasting time designing something unfeasible while showing you're actually not thinking as a researcher. Now, what you need instead is a bounded context. It's a limited number of participants. It's a realistic time frame. It's a focused analytical lens. We'll talk more about design in the next video, but for now, bear in mind that your research questions drive the scope, and too much scope doesn't show ambition, it shows academic immaturity. It's okay, because you're still learning, but don't mistake one for the other. Now, this is not to say that ambition in itself is bad. Ambition, I think, is good, but it must be scaled to your level and to your timeline and resources. So think about it in those terms. Here's a practical exercise I do with my students. Write your research questions and then try to answer them in 1 or 2 sentences. If this is, and of course this is, there's lots of speculation going into it, but if this is impossible to do, then you can be thinking about your research question as something that's really a bit too broad at the moment, and it needs some work. A good research question leaves space for complexity, but it should not be so vast that the answer would require a book. Another important distinction, descriptive versus analytical questions. Now, this is really very important because that defines the nature of what you're going to be looking for. Descriptive questions ask what is happening, while analytical questions ask how or why something is happening. Let's have a look and see what they look like. For example, what language practices occur in multilingual group work? That is a descriptive question. It's asking for examples of things that you can observe. Now, how do multilingual students use language practices to negotiate identity during group work? That begins to move in the analytical sort of direction. Neither is inherently better than the other, but you need to know what it is that you're asking for. You should be aware of the level at which you're working and what the expectations of your program are. For me, at the BA level, a strong descriptive work is often appropriate. Ideally, you'll also show some degree of analytical insights. At the MA level, for me, a degree of analytical framing is really very important. It's more than just expected. And moving into criticality really points at a really good thesis. It is also important to think about alignment, and this is what I mean by alignment. Your research questions, your theoretical framework and your concepts, your methodological approach and the protocol you're going to follow to collect the data, to analyze the data, all of that must be coherent. They must speak to each other, right? That's what makes a coherent and a well-aligned project, ultimately. If your question is about identity construction, your framework and your concepts should include theories and ideas about identity and how identity emerges, how it is negotiated, how it flows in different spaces. If your question is about emotional experiences, your data collection should reflect that focus, and therefore it should allow your participants to articulate emotions, reflect on emotions, and give you insight into the focus of your study. A misaligned thesis, that's where the question, the theory, the method are disconnected, creates a very messy space. It creates confusion, not only for you, but also for anybody reading the thesis, and ultimately it weakens the whole project. And that is a shame, because there's a lot of work, even in a weak thesis sometimes. So alignment creates coherence, and not only that, but it allows you to go deeper into the data when the discussion comes. It makes your discussion more meaningful, and that's something we'll talk about at a later video. Now, a word about wording. Keep your research questions simple. Avoid unnecessary jargon, avoid big words, avoid stacking multiple sub-questions inside of one sentence and then nestling them in one another. Don't make it complicated. If you need sub-questions, that's completely fine, but make sure each one serves the main question. So when you have a main question, the sub-question needs to really connect to that main question in some sort of way. Something I do with my students is I ask them to paraphrase the research questions in different ways. So give me 3 or 4 versions of each research question. By doing this, when you think through the phrasing, the restructuring, the paraphrasing, finding new words, finding new ways of making something complex less complicated. This exercise really will show you the options that may feel more transparent and less cumbersome, and that's really what you want to go for. If you can, ask a classmate and share your questions with them and ask them to tell you what they understand your question is about and what your questions are looking for. Now, this will give you really great insight, and honestly, don't underestimate the value of talking to your classmates about these things. Ultimately, and this applies generally, clarity is intellectual discipline. Complex writing does not make a project stronger, clear writing does. Academic language, whatever that is, shouldn't be obscure. Academic writing, whatever that is, should be nice, clear, and accessible. And finally, understand that your research question may evolve over time, and that's fine. Research is an organic process. The first versions of your research question, and actually the first version of anything you write, is rarely the final version. So as you refine your literature review, as you learn more, as you collect data, as you think more concretely about everything, as you discuss things with your supervisor, as you see similar projects emerging, the question should actually sharpen, and that's really not a proof of instability. Don't think about this as bad mess, it's good mess. It's actually, at least in my opinion, intellectual development. By addressing that former research question is no longer what really serves you, you're telling me that you've thought about it a lot and you've learned. A research question is a working tool, and while some methodological designs may treat them very differently, at this very early stage where we are, you should still be thinking about your research questions as something that's evolving and that should serve the purpose of improving the thesis as a whole. Now let me end with this. A strong research question does not need to impress anyone, not the world, not society, certainly not me. It tries to clarify. A research question that's good demonstrates that you have understood the field well enough to ask something that's precise, that's feasible, and that's meaningful. And that's where the value of your research question really, really lies. When you reach that sort of point, the rest of the thesis, that is your design, the data collection, the analytical protocol, all these things that will come up in the next few videos, really do follow logically. Your research question is the spine of the entire project. And in the next video, we'll talk about how that spine turns into a concrete research design, how to move from question to methodology, and from methodology to data. See you then.